So today we have with us Anemone Boot, who is the city pastor of Offenbach, Germany. As many of you who've been around for a while know, I went and visited Germany early in 2022, and I met Anemone when I was there. She is a part of what's called Church in Action in the Frankfurt area. And so Anemone, I told the story about Anemone, and I want to tell it again to refresh your memory. Anemone felt the call of God to go into Offenbach, which is a city right next to Frankfurt. And when I was there, I visited the coffee shop that she has founded and uses as part of her mission and ministry in Offenbach. And right next door was a very, very nice restaurant that she brought us over to, and we received some food while we were there. The food was really, really good. And I began to hear this story emerge that the owners of this restaurant were Iranian. And they have a history of being Muslim. When you're a Muslim, you have respect for Jesus. Jesus is a part of the story of Muslims. They just don't revere Jesus as the Son of God the way that Christians do. And so this family had a nephew or someone who was younger who started asking questions about Jesus and wanted to know more about Jesus. And Anemone had started making connections throughout Offenbach. And this Iranian family said, you know, we met that pastor. Maybe she could help him learn a little bit more about Jesus. And so they went to her and asked, could you talk to him about Jesus? And so she did and shared the story about Jesus. And then they all became more and more interested and asked more and more questions until they became interested in coming to the Christian faith. And when I was there in Germany, I went to a baptism service and saw this Iranian family with a history of Muslim faith become baptized into the Christian faith because of the way in which she engaged the city and was available for the moment in which someone wanted to know more about Jesus. You may remember me telling that story before, but this is the pastor who pioneered that work and that conversation and that evangelism. I've had a great joy to spend time with her in Germany, and then also the last couple of days while she's been here as well. I trust and I believe you'll find her to be as compelling and as interesting and as fun and as challenging as I do as well as she comes to share about what God is doing in Germany and how that might possibly relate to us in Ellicott City, Maryland. Anemone, would you come and join us and share today?
Thank you very much for this wonderful introduction. I would like to share with you how I first stepped into a church. It wasn't quite as beautiful as this one. It was an older church, still beautiful in its own way, in Germany. And you must imagine a Christmas night service with these colorful windows and everybody sitting in their rows. And I was a teenager at that time, and our family didn't really go to church. We didn't really think of ourselves as Christians, but going to church on Christmas Eve, that was a tradition that's not negotiable. So all of us sitting in those pews and standing up, sitting down, standing up, sitting down, watching everything that's happening. At some point, whenever we've been asked to stand up again, I remember standing in this church and I had this question. It somehow arose in me. It almost felt as if someone would knock at my heart. And this question was, who is God and what is he like? I couldn't get rid of this. It made something in me. It created some thirst in me. So I waited and I looked around. The service wasn't quite yet over, but I realized this is full today. And everybody here looks like perfect families, and it's also so nicely made and put together. But next week, this place will be empty. Not even half as many people will be here the Sunday after Christmas. So what is this all about, really? What is church about? I looked at the families with the beautiful hair and clothing, and they looked glamorous in a way, but I also knew them from school, and I knew they're not half as perfect as they look today. So when they go home after the service, what is their family life all about? How does God work in their families? So I was there wondering, if I take away all the layers from this beautiful program, from all these beautiful faces, but if I take all the layers away, what is the core of all? Who is God? And what is he like? Now, I can be very persistent. So the second service is over, I ran straight to the pastor of this Lutheran church, and I asked him, and was like, okay, here's the deal. Who is God? And what is he like? And is he interested in us? And he looked at me, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know. That's a weird question. I thought, you have the wrong job. But who could help me? And so he said, maybe you can go to the youth group. Maybe those crazy young people have questions like that. Maybe they can help you. And I thought, okay, well, let's do that. So next Friday night, I showed up at the youth group of this church. But it was closed because of a lack of attendance. They just finished it, and they said they will not open it again. There are nobody coming. So that wasn't very helpful. I went to my family. I went to my religion teacher, Christian religion teacher, and everybody I could find had the same reaction. I don't know. So it took me months of asking everybody I can think of, and still I couldn't find anyone to tell me something about God. So at some point I thought, well, maybe my question is wrong. Because I learned in school, if you have a thesis and then you try to test it, but it didn't work, the whole process didn't lead me anywhere. Maybe my question is wrong. Maybe there is just nothing behind that. Maybe I have to stop here because I really tried everything. And then I had this one last thought. Well, to be fair, I did ask everyone about God. I didn't ask himself. It's a bit crazy. Maybe there's nobody listening, but it wouldn't be fair to finish off this process without giving him the chance to basically talk to each other. And so I was on my way. I had this thought when I just walked out of a train and on my way to a party. It was Friday night, and I was on my way there when I just started to look down and basically pray a prayer that says, okay, God, in case you're listening, I tried this and this and this and this. I can't find anyone who could help me with this. If you are interested in me or in relationship with me or even us as humanity, it's your turn now. And humble as I am, I also gave him a deadline. Because I said, hey, I really tried for months, so it would be very nice if you could do this soon, not gonna wait forever, and also would be great if you can do it quite obvious. Because if you send some little birdie and I might miss it, that wouldn't be fair either. So to be fair, make it big and make it quick. I wouldn't recommend that prayer anymore. I just didn't know better. So I said amen. And just finishing off my walk, and I thought, well, for the first prayer, I think that's all right. And the minute I stopped looking down and I looked up, I arrived at my destination for that evening. A huge bus was in front of me and in front of the entry of this place. And it has a poster on it, like a big coach. The poster on it, let's talk about Jesus. And I thought, it's big. And it's quick. So I guess we are going into the second round here. So I walked around the bus. I didn't dare to go in there. I tried to find someone on the party to join me. As soon as I could find someone, I walked in. They turned around, ran away. So I was standing alone in this bus. They were drinking tea on a Friday night on the street with pups. They were drinking tea, talking to each other, and I sat there for a very long time. And after a few hours, I asked them, okay, what is this? What is this about? And they told me they are a youth group from a local church, and this is a reach out. And I said, okay, you should have talked to someone if this is a reach out, but okay, how can I visit you? How can I go to you? And they told me how, and to make a longer story short, it took me a very long time to get some welcoming sentiments out of this youth group, because I went there and I realized that they know what they're doing, they know each other, they know their songs, they know how a good youth group should look like, but they had no idea what to do with me. I remember walking in there and they would play games and I didn't know, can I join? Or they would eat pizza and I didn't know, can I have a slice? Where do I pay for this? And then they would sit down and sing songs that were very strange to me. I always say, for me, it wasn't the church hymns that I knew from this little church with the 10 windows, the German Lutheran church, but it was more like modern church, almost pop songs, not quite pop songs, but it wanted to get one somehow. So it was on the way of being a pop song, but it still talked about Jesus. So I had to figure out what this music is about. But then someone would open the Bible and share about Jesus. And that felt as if I'm a dry sponge and water finally dropped into me and I can breathe and I can experience God finally. I loved those 10 minutes. And then everybody goes back to singing and playing games and not knowing what to do with me. I came back next week, same scenario. And the week after, same scenario. After a few weeks, I thought, this is so humiliating because I don't know what to do to fit in, and they didn't know what to do with me. This is so humiliating. I don't know if I can still do this. But I remember that I thought, okay, there are really just two ways how this story can play out. One is, at some point, someone will have to say hi, or I just don't come anymore. That would end the process. But I don't want it to be me where the thing ends. So I will just keep coming and coming and coming, and at some point, I will have them say hi. Took 3 months, but then it worked out. So all that to say, when we started thinking about what does it mean to be a church, how does it mean to be a church that's reaching out to people who didn't grow up with all of this. We wanted to be as welcoming as possible because I never ever wanted anybody to feel the way I felt when I tried to fit in and never really did. So today I would like to share some stories out of our ministry, a little bit like the one with the restaurant owner, but also about a role model that I think helps us to rethink our faith in God in some ways. So before we do that, I would ask you to stand up and join me in prayer. God, you see how we arrived here today. You know our thoughts, our feelings, some anxieties, some questions. You know if we had a long week or just encouraged to be here. You know if we are calculating and thinking what the next going to be look like, or Lord, you know if we are really here to listen and learn from you. I ask you that you may open our hearts to your presence today, Lord. That we may seek you together as a community. That we open our hearts for you and for strangers. That we open our hearts for you and everybody else in our lives. That we may overcome boundaries, and that we come before you today intentionally and hungry for your work in us. Amen. You may be seated. So this role model I want to talk to you about today, or I want to start with, is a prophet and a priest. He lived and served in the final decade of South Judah, and he had a really tough job because he tried to warn and explain to the Jewish people at that time they're not living in God's covenant. And if they keep doing that, that will have severe consequences. So severe that God will allow a foreign power to come in, blow over them, destroy Jerusalem, and carry God's people away into exile. So let's say he wasn't the most popular guy in town. The priest is called Jeremiah, and this foreign power are the Babylonians. Now, this is a nation known to be obsessed with two things, wealth and war. And they indeed came in, destroyed Jerusalem, and carried God's people away, and Jeremiah was one of them. He got catched and captive in jail. So while he was in jail, not knowing what the next day is going to look like, far away from home, a piece of property is becoming available. And this property follows a very specific protocol, who is allowed to purchase it, and he is the next in line. So Jeremiah, far away from his country, stuck in jail, with no idea how even the next day is going to look like, has this idea, has this feeling that God is talking to him, that he indeed should put his money into purchasing this property. And it is amazing to me that in all the chaos and dirt and pain and lamenting that he is in, he is reminded of God's promise from the 5th book of Moses, where God's promised not to abandon them, but have them return to their land, to heal them as a community. And he also already promised that someone out of David's bloodline is going to come, and eventually all the nations are going to acknowledge that he is this true king. So in all the not knowing what tomorrow is going to look like, just being carried away from everything he knows, he is reminded of God's faithfulness. And he decides to put all eggs into one basket and buy this land. Now, for me, that is crazy, to be honest. And it is crazy in a way that made me wonder what people thought that were in the prison right around him. They must have thought, this man makes no sense. The decision for him to trust God in this specific moment, that at some time, somewhere, he actually will need this land because God is going to be faithful to his promise, makes absolutely no sense until you count on God showing up. And so my question for us today is, what if we would have a faith and a life that makes absolutely no sense unless we count on God showing up? I think when Peter jumps out of a boat and walks on water toward Jesus, that made no sense unless you trust on God showing up. I think when the lady that poured her valuable perfume oil over Jesus and washed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair, that made no sense to anybody in the room unless you count on Jesus. A boy that offers his lunchbox with a few breads and fish to feed 5,000 people and more makes no sense unless you count on God showing up. So what if we would do exactly that? Now, when we started our first ministry with homeless people, we learned quite early on that there is a lot of things happening to help people in experiencing homelessness. So when we started, we would have food with us, or we would have blankets, but we learned quite early on that there are a lot of NGOs that have all of that already prepared, and they do a way better job than we would. They know what they do it for many years, and that's wonderful. But then I also learned that something that really is a problem still is loneliness. Because you can give someone something, but it doesn't really bring them out of their loneliness. It is so bad that at some point I met one guy that literally lost his voice because he didn't speak to people in years. He would sit on the ground and some would pass, and some would even throw in a coin or two, but nobody would talk to him. We asked him for his name, and he couldn't physically answer us. So we thought, okay, if loneliness is the real problem here, what could we do to meet someone on an eye-to-eye level? To not stay into this habit of me being the one giving and them being the one receiving, which kind of still keeps us apart and keeps this dynamic alive. What could we do to really meet on an eye-to-eye level? What would we do with friends? With friends, for example, we would go to a movie theater. So we thought, let's do this. Let's rent a movie theater and ask all the homeless people in Frankfurt to join for free, and let's have a movie together. So we went to the biggest movie theater in town, we talked to them, we negotiated a nice price, they even put some popcorn on top, and we chose a good Christian film, which was Ocean 11. We wanted to give them some fundraising ideas. I mean, we have to do. So we planned all of that, we invited them in, and it was one of the most beautiful evenings you can imagine. But because you would have students and families and homeless people sitting all over this room, eating popcorn together and watching this movie. I loved that. We went back to our normal program, and on one other evening, where we had a concert in a pub, also a ministry we do for many years. We have concerts in the pub, and we would have food and live music, and we would invite people to sign up for social projects. And one of those nights, one of my team members was somewhat off. He was a bit weird that night, and I learned later that he was high. So he was so high that he, at some point, just dropped all his stuff and ran away. And because I was afraid he might do something to himself, I took off my high heels and ran right after him. And he ran from this pub that we worked in through the city center up to a park. And he was a bit faster than me, so I tried to not lose him when I ran into a group of homeless people. Now, it was in the middle of summer, super hot, and most of them already had a couple of beers. Together with the sun, it was not a great combination. This one guy particularly sees me and sees how I'm running towards this group. He had a very bad day, very aggressive. I remember I thought he looks like a Viking, like huge guy, red hair and beard, fully tattooed, no shirt on. And so he saw me, and that aggravated him, and he started running towards me with his hands and shouting, and I thought, oh my word, this is gonna hurt. And so I stopped and I just prayed and I asked God, please, whatever, please help here. And then that very second, another guy, homeless guy, jumped in between us, hugged the guy so he couldn't hit me, and he said, don't do anything to her. She gave me popcorn. I said, great, thank you. So, end of that story is that we sat down and I talked to both of them, and the big aggressive guy actually kind of fell into himself, and he cried for 2 hours because his mother died and he don't know how to cope with it, and that somehow throw him out of. So he told us his whole life story, and we sat down and we prayed and had a wonderful, wonderful time together. Everything turned around. But the moment that I looked at, like, why would you rent a movie theater and invite homeless people to come in? Why would you do events in the pub with people in your team who are still figuring all kinds of things out and running away high? Why would you run into a group? None of that made sense, but God did show up. Another project that we did and do is in a hospital. So it was somewhere around also Christmas time that we thought, what is happening to kids that are in the hospital around Christmas? Is there something we could do to help them, to make their life easier, to bring some color and joy into those hard days when you're so sick you have to stay in the hospital during Christmas? So again, we made this concert. We had people sign up. We had musicians coming in. We had clowns. We did gingerbreads, all kinds of things. And after that evening, when we really enjoyed it, I thought that's going to be it. We might come back next year, but that's going to be it. But then the pastor of that hospital, and they had two, a Catholic and a Protestant one, the Protestant pastor came to me and she said, "Thank you so much for this. We are so overwhelmed with being with the people in the rooms when something happens and be with them. I don't have time to even prepare a service. This hospital should have services on Sunday nights, but there is no way that any of us can really prepare that well." And I thought, maybe we can help with that. So in the chapel, we decided to come every second Sunday night. I would ask musicians that are studying music at the academy to come in and to do like a little concert, and we would have young people organizing the service. But the most time we spent in going from door to door and inviting people, letting them know that there is going to be a service tonight. So in some rooms, people were just angry, throwing us out, and some they would say, "I would like to come, but I am in a wheelchair, or I'm in a bed." So what we did is we offered them 10 minutes before the service to come back to their rooms and get them and bring them in with their wheelchairs. And we had even one woman that we had to bring in her bed because she couldn't sit straight. So I remember one evening where we went through all the spiel, and it was a lot of preparation, and typically just maybe 5 or 6 patients would show up. But we kept doing it. And one evening, there was one woman that was very, very sick. She had cancer, and she just came, but she knew that it's going to be a few weeks left. And she said she would like to come, but she is in her bed, and she wouldn't be able to come in a wheelchair. So we said, no problem. And we found a way to bring her in to the back of the chapel in her bed, and she could listen. We did it once, we did it twice. But the third time she came, she needed help to just switch her head in a way that she could listen well. That's how weak she got. And it was heartbreaking to see that happening. But I also remember on an evening when we brought her back to the room, she told us that she never was someone that went to church. She never felt like she had a connection to Jesus. But being able to be part of the services, seeing that young people are loving her without knowing her, and listening to this beautiful music gave her a taste of heaven. And so we prayed with her, and she asked Jesus to come into her life, and she died a few days later. But I remember that I thought all these years people thought we are crazy to do hours and hours of preparation for 5 people sitting in those rows. But it made so much sense because I really felt like God showed up for this woman in this chapel. What if we live a life that makes no sense unless we trust that God shows up and is faithful to his promises? Another example for me is actually the coffee shop in Offenbach. So when I left pastoring Frankfurt to do a new church plant in the city right next to Frankfurt in Offenbach, we started in October 19. And it was an adventurous time. We planned a whole weekend where we would do all kinds of things, events and concerts and serve people, all kinds of things to have all of Offenbach experience what heaven on earth could look like in their city, just to give them a taste. So after that, people signed up. They want to be part of services. And I remember the very first Sunday where we wanted to gather we booked a restaurant because we do services in public spaces and places, coffee shops and restaurants and stuff. So I booked a restaurant for a service, and the night before the service, I called them, and they told me they're not interested in having us anymore as guests. And I thought, what? I mean, this is not possible. It is an evening before. We need some place. We need to come. So I had to find some other convincing ways. They let us come. We had to find a new location. They went out of business. It was crazy. We had 5 different venues in the first 4 months. A nightmare for a church plant where you try to give people stability and a place where they can connect and build relationships. A nightmare. And then the pandemic hit. And we have lockdowns, and it is chaos, and nobody knows what's allowed and what not. And in the middle of all of that, I decided to open up a coffee shop. Now, you can imagine people told me I'm totally crazy because in the middle of a pandemic, when restaurants and coffee shops are all closing down and they close shop and they give up because it's just not doable, I just thought we need a home. This church needs a place to meet and to meet new people and to serve. We're gonna need a home. And at some point, this pandemic is gonna be over and we need a place. So we started during the 5th lockdown or something to renovate, to start this, to have to-go business so that people could come in and receive at least a prayer and then go on their way. So we did all of that, and it looked totally crazy until we could open up again. And then the Ukraine war happened. People are anxious. They don't want to go out anymore. This whole phase was total craziness. And I think it was just last week when I received the numbers that throughout all this craziness, we actually made it. We made it financially. The business is stable. And I thought God did really show up. So there are many, many, many more stories. But I want to live a life. I decided to live a life that is so deeply rooted in God's promises and His presence and His faithfulness that I can dare to love boldly, to give freely, and to commit diligently to His work in our cities in a way that makes no sense to everybody else, but to God and me, because I do believe that He is going to show up when He promised to do so. Now, how does this trust and commitment relate to God's kingdom? I think that when Jesus proclaimed that and talked about God's kingdom again and again and again, it is the most frequent issue that He talks about. And we have to imagine as He is on the move with His disciples, somewhere between Nazareth and Jerusalem, they're always on the move. They stop, they serve, preach, and then they're on their way again. At some point, in Mark 10:17-22, Jesus was about to start again and be on His way. A man ran up to Him, fell on his knees, and asked Him, "Good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life?" And then Jesus asked, "Why do you call me good? No one is good except God alone. And you know the commandments: you shall not murder, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not give false testimony, you shall not defraud, honor your father and mother." And then, "Teacher," he declared, "all these I have kept since I was a boy." And so Jesus looked at him in love. "One thing you lack," he said. "Go, sell everything you have and give to the poor, and then you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me." And this man's face fell. He went away sad because he had great wealth. I always found this story fascinating, and I had to think about it for a few years at some point for it to make sense to me. But when it did, I realized this man is a wealthy man. I think he was dressed well. He fell on his knees in the dirt. This man really wanted an answer. He didn't came just for a little chit-chat. He ran towards Jesus and he fell on his knees and he really wanted to know, what do I have to do to inherit eternal life? What do I have to do to have a place in heaven? But Jesus looks at him in love and he asks him to sell everything, give it to the poor, and come follow him today. So instead of telling him what to do to be in heaven someday, he asks him to be part of his kingdom work today. Because the kingdom came into our world through Jesus. And we are invited to participate in his work now already and to be part of his kingdom now already. So I think as a church, we really are asked to have a faithful life in a way that's kind of looking crazy, because we count on God showing up, not just someday, but today. So for Jeremiah, God told him to buy something. And for this young man, he asked him to give something away. In both cases, he invited him to trust him and to be part of his work here and now. So when we come back to us, back into this room, back into this morning, I think this church is absolutely wonderful. I've seen how you prepare for the kids. I see the room and I am amazed. And we went through the whole church, room to room. I saw your relationships and how much the staff love each other. I am amazed by this wonderful, warm, loving church. I really am. I still want to ask everyone here, what would it look like for you personally to go one step further? To make a step that is so trusting in God's promises that it looks crazy to people around you? What could it look like to give generously in a way that your colleagues at work think, this woman is crazy? How can she give so much into mission? And to commit so wholeheartedly into serving people in your city that your neighbors think or your colleagues think, how can he spend so much time with these people that wouldn't be his friends on a normal basis? How can we heal, be part of this healing process of the city and reach out to the needs in our context? How would your family look like if you dare to live a life that makes no sense unless you trust on God showing up? How would your work look like? How would this city look like when we would live lives that are trusting in God that much that it doesn't make sense unless we really anticipate God showing up? So I would like to end this time together with a prayer and poem that Mother Teresa wrote down. And I think it is challenging but loving and invites us to have this faith and walk out on the water. She says, "People are often unreasonable, illogical, and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you're kind, people may accuse you of selfish motives. Be kind anyway. If you're successful, you will win some false friends and true enemies. Succeed anyway. If you are honest and frank, people may cheat you. Be honest anyway. What you spend years building, someone could destroy overnight. Build anyway. If you find serenity and happiness, they might be jealous. Be happy anyway. The good you do today, people will often forget tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it might never be enough. Give the world the best anyway." Because you see, in the final analysis, it's between you and your God. It never was about you and them anyway. Amen.